With Doom Eternal being out for over a year, I've got to say that it's been one hell of a wild ride. This game on its own has made me a better player across a wide spectrum of games, but sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes you just want to be king shit in Doom, but quick swapping on a controller can get tedious. Luckily for you, I have just the trick to up your quick swapping game on controllers, so let's get to it. What am I talking about? Well, weapon swapping for the console, my fellow scrub. I'll be the first to admit that we can't be as quick as a PC player, but I think that I have found a method that will allow us controller players to get a taste of what the master race has to offer. So why do we weapon swap? Because you look like a badass, dude, of course. But in all honesty, we swap for three main reasons. The first is that we want to mitigate the slow firing time of weapons such as the ballista and the rocket launcher. And the second, and this ties heavily with number one, is that weapon swapping allows us to maintain our DPS and significantly reduce the time to kill for certain demons. Now finally, it's to better manage our ammo economy. And what I mean by that is that while it is completely viable to go through this game only swapping through a couple of weapons, this method requires you to chainsaw more often since you're limiting the types of ammo you use. Now, I'm not one to tell anybody how to play, so if this works for you, then by all means do it. But for me, personally, I like hiding away in chainsaw iframes while I take a breath and reassess my situation. And with weapon swapping, I can be sure that I will always have a pip available more often than not compared to just using a couple of weapons, since I won't be chainsawing as often. So we covered the why, what about the how? To start, let's talk about settings for a moment. Doom gives us console players a couple of things to fiddle with in order to aid us in moving through our arsenal a little bit better. Now let's start with the weapon wheel customization. Since the weapon wheel is a key component to how we will weapon swap, it's important to experiment with the options to make using it more comfortable. First, we can choose the size, a 4 slot, a 6 slot, or the full 8 slot. Now personally, I prefer having my full arsenal at the ready, but I find that the 6 slot is perfect for brawler mode. If you want to check that out, Under the Mail's got a video on it. I recommend it. It's really challenging and it's fun. But, moving on, the 4 slot seems kind of useless, but to each their own, I guess. Now additionally, you can rearrange where the weapons are on the wheel. Again, I prefer the default, but experiment around with your wheel to find what is the most optimal setup for you. Our other option is relatively new, and man do I love it when it introduces features like this. This is the weapon wheel delay, which allows the player to adjust how long it takes for the wheel to appear. The lowest setting is 70 milliseconds and the default is 180. I found myself testing between 110 and 120 milliseconds, as I found 70 to be just a little too quick for me. But this is an excellent feature for us console players. So, the first tip I can suggest is to experiment with these settings to find what works best for you. Now, for the real meat of the video, the reason why you are here, swapping on console. Now I have a method that seems to work pretty decently, but you have to be thinking about it actively, right, in order to utilize it. But for the sake of being thorough, let's just talk about weapon swapping in general. So on the controller, the default swap button is your R1 or your Xbox equivalent, and pressing it swaps to your previous weapon. Holding it opens the weapon wheel. While these are the basics for using a controller, it's very much the foundation for console play. Now, you can use the wheel primarily, but that can break up combat a little too much, so we need a way to swap through our arsenal without relying on the wheel too much. But I should note that with the weapon wheel delay settings, this is hardly noticeable anymore, but using the wheel for every swap can be a little bit cumbersome. Now, I have a technique, if you will, that I like to call switch hitting. Primarily because it revolves around a combination of both using the wheel and the typical swap. So here's an example of what I'm talking about. Let's say I have a favorite combo I like to enter encounters with. Let's say it's precision bolt and ballista. It's my 1-1-2. So I will start by swapping from precision bolt to ballista and back to PB. 2 total swaps, right? And after the second swap, I'll use the wheel to move to the next weapon, and we'll say in this case, it's the rocket launcher. So now I'm swapping between rockets and precision bolt for 2 swaps again before I switch. I call it switch hitting because we're always falling back on the previous weapon after using the wheel, so we're kind of still switching back to that other thing. I don't know, it's just kind of funny. It's kind of a funny thing to call it, and it's kind of memorable, I guess. You know what I mean? Anyway, regardless, this is great for when you need to burn down a tyrant or a baron quickly, or if you need to put a ton of damage into a crowd to create some resources. Now there is a little bit of a flow to it, but it does take total concentration, which I assume is probably the same on PC, but you know, I don't have that experience to say so. But either way, you know, it's not something you can just use mindlessly. But really, that's the gist of it. Now, some other tips before we go. Always be mindful of your surroundings, and be ready to swap in response to a change in your situation. Sometimes, it might be better to bust out the energy shield over the rockets just to give you a little bit of a reprieve, some breathing room, gather some resources, kind of just reassess your situation. And then, while swapping is an important part of the game, don't forget that you can combo with your equipment as well for even more damage while you move through your weapon. This is especially useful when fighting something like a Baron or other pressure demons, as the Ice Bomb freezes them, obviously, and grenades will fall to them. You can also work your equipment into your rotation when firing a weapon that isn't using a mod, since the finger that would be activating the mod is free to hit with those types of weapons. And I'm talking about like something like the rocket launcher or the ballista, something that you're not necessarily thinking about using the mod for, I guess. I mean, like, if it's luck on burst, whatever. I don't want to be too specific on this, but basically, if it doesn't require you to use the mod in your swapping combo, fire a grenade or an ice bomb. And if you're going to fire an ice bomb, you might as well throw out a flame belch. You know, there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing this. Now, all that being said, here's my last suggestion for implementing this. Go into a master level, or hell, you know, even something like the Final Sin or Urdak, something with a bunch of super heavies, and get some practice in on them. Don't worry about the difficulty either, since the whole point of this is to practice, and a big part of using the weapon wheel is to develop that muscle memory so you can swap without holding the wheel open for too long. So, you know, the reason why I say master levels or Urdak these later levels is because there are demons that can take a little bit more punishment, so they require you to move through your arsenal a little bit more, and it's going to get you into that a little bit more of that flow and that concentration spot where like you're not just swapping between a couple of weapons, you're swapping through a whole list, like your whole arsenal, just to take out a single demon, basically. So that's the idea. Now, before we get out of here, I'm going to give you some examples of gameplay of me using switch hitting to eliminate some big threats, alright? Do you have any other methods for weapon swapping on console? Post them in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. This has been Alpal. Be kind, be safe, spread the love, and we'll see you next time. Peace.